Hello everybody. I'm very pleased to open the session on artificial intelligence and education, ethical challenges and opportunities. It is an open debate that we are organizing in the framework of the 7th Conference on Smart Learning Ecosystem and Regional Development. So I would be able to do next. Yes. Okay, so we thought that it would be good to start with a few questions. These questions were sent previously to our panelists, just to have a starting point. They were asked to answer some of the questions, all of the questions, or any other questions they like. So before starting the debate, I would like to read for all participants the starting points, namely, how can artificial intelligence support learning and learning assessment while empowering the human beings and preserve respect for human autonomy? Will artificial intelligence transform the learning methodologies? In this context, how will the role of the teacher be transformed? How can artificial intelligence support human interaction and collaboration between teachers and learners? Will AI enhance interaction and collaboration, or will it, on the contrary, lead teachers and students apart? What are the opportunities for collaboration between humans and algorithms? How can artificial intelligence contribute to ensure inclusion and equity in and through education and improve access to education for all? How can we use AI in education so that it will not deepen the digital divide? Considering that now most machine learning algorithms are based on a huge amount of data, is there an issue concerning teachers and learners' data privacy protection? How can we achieve a balance between open access to data and data privacy protection? And last question, will an artificial intelligent teacher replace the human teacher in the future? Well, this is the everlasting question in AI. Will AI replace humans? If your answer is yes, which will be the implications? Now, for these questions, and of course, some more, I would like to introduce you the panelists. So the panelists are Kaśka Porayska-Pomsta from EC-JRC, Erika Briscoe from University of Maryland, Scott Crossley from Georgia State University, Oronzo Parlangeli from University of Siena, and Tuomi and Milo Phillips-Brown, University of Oxford, and Tuomi, Meaning Processes Ltd. Now, unfortunately, one of our panelists cannot participate because well, he is in a difficult position. I hope not very difficult. He got the everlasting, apparently, virus. Okay, so now I invite the panelists in this order to present very shortly their point of view and then to start the debates. I would propose that during the panel, we can start questions, we can ask questions and be less formal if you do agree. So Kaśka, are you here with us?
I mean, the questions that you have read out are very rich, and but there is an overlap between them, and the overlap that that I see keeps coming back to two things: the quality of education, how we can ensure and perhaps even enhance the quality of education with the help of AI, and the other one relates to how we can preserve human autonomy, and through looking at different forms of interaction, between humans and machines, or through rethinking the way that we actually potentially design these technologies. And looking from the perspective of the research that is already out there within the context of AI in education, we do actually have some of the answers or potential avenues of that might be worth pursuing. One such avenue with respect to managing the relationship between humans and machines, be it teachers or learners, relates to a technique or a paradigm, depending on how you want to look at it, called open learner models. And in my view, and in fact, in the view of a lot of people who are working within the field, open learner models provide a really a flexible way in which we can actually employ AI in education systems to deliver the various supports at a kind of micro level. So, for example, support learners in learning maths, and teachers in spotlighting the various critical episodes during the learning process as a way of engaging in formative assessment, for example. But they also provide a way of opening up the models that are being generated by the AI, and allowing the users, whoever they may be, and for whatever purposes, in whatever context, to engage with those models at the level of, well, at multiple different levels, but primarily to do with the way that these models actually assess the students during interactions. And there are some really good examples from within the field of different ways in which these models can be utilized, from being simply inspectable. So the students or the teachers can all, indeed together, they can inspect those models as a basis, for example, for discussing in a very concrete way about the critical episode or particular aspects of the learning process. They can be another form of these open learning models, which is particularly promising, is called negotiable models, where the learners can actually engage in a moment by moment basis with the system, and argue with the system, or try to, basically explain themselves, and they can certainly question the model's correctness. All the way, so this is a third kind of broad type of these models, where the learners can actually construct or co-construct these models with the system. And there are multiple different opportunities that these models provide. One is obviously engagement with one's own learning and data. Another one are opportunities for self-explanation, and for a different kind of engagement also with the teacher, if the setup is such that these models can be inspected with educational practitioners, for example. And we have examples from, I have examples from my own research where this really worked very well, where it really changed the relationship between the learners and the practitioners, because they basically it gave them a different way of discussing how the learning process is taking place, a different way of setting goals, and different ways of assessing whether these goals have been achieved. They do also allow for the development of metacognitive competencies, which, as we know from educational research, are fundamental to not just, well, to learning and to a multitude of different aspects of the way that we engage with the environment. So I probably should stop now and give other people a chance to talk, but this is my opening statement here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your intervention. Okay, and now before asking Ilkka to have her intervention, I would like to add one more challenge that was raised to me by the presentation of Phillips-Brown in the first day. Well, I like very much something that he said, that a smart classroom has eyes and ears. So I like very much that. And of course, by these eyes and ears, you can do a lot of things. But we are not here to discuss about so many things that we can do. Our problem is it good? Is it ethical that the smart classroom has eyes and ears? Okay, Ilkka, please.
All right, so yeah, my name is Erica Briscoe, and I come up with these problems or these questions from less of an educational perspective, but more generally, I guess. And a lot of the work I do concentrates on how we can operationalize AI in a number of contexts. And so from that point of view, you know, very, very positive, or I guess pro, you know, operationalizing AI, but in doing so with the appropriate, what I like to use the term assurance, that the algorithms will perform as expected, if that is possible, if it's possible to have expectations. And so a lot of the work that I concentrate on and that I talk to people a lot, a good bit is how do we have that assurance, and what components are in those assurance. And of course, that includes what was mentioned in the keynote, things like bias and fairness, but also things that we can't necessarily predict. So we might have sort of like natural perturbations in our data, which we may expect or we may not. But there also might be adversarial sort of behavior as well. Hopefully in an educational setting, we wouldn't expect to see some of that, but the other two areas that are probably more likely to be found in an educational setting are things like differences in how the algorithms will operate over time, and making sure that algorithms are developed really with the appropriate context in mind. That is, they're not developed in a context or in a learning setting and then misapplied or misappropriated for different contexts. And so what I would argue is that we need basically continuous TEV&V, so testing, evaluation, validation, and verification of algorithms, and that should be part of what is instituted in basically a continuous DevOps cycle or secure DevOps cycle. And so to that end, we do need to keep track of metrics, such as the ones that were mentioned before, as well as sort of new test case assurances that are built into this process and automatically determined as the algorithms are used. And I'll end there for the introduction.
Thank you. Paul?
Hi, I'm assuming that everyone can hear me. I'm going to do something splendid. I'm actually going to share my screen. Don't get too excited because I really didn't prepare all that much. But I did want to share this as just a kind of standalone heuristic about how I look at bias in AI and perceptions of bias in AI. And this comes from work done by my colleague, Chris Dede at Harvard University. And so from my perspective, I'm very much looking at AI from a big data perspective. And so the work that I do focuses mostly on the development of large-scale educational data sets that are made public and freely and openly available to the communities. And within those large-scale open public data sets, we want to make sure that we provide as much information as possible to envision data and models that come from these data sets that are unbiased as possible. And note that I use the term as possible because there is going to be bias in all of our data sets, and there's going to be bias in all of our models. And so basically what we look at is we start looking at this section here where it says data divide. And this represents the idea that oftentimes when we collect large data sets, especially educational data sets, we don't represent the populations of interests, right? Because sometimes it's more difficult to collect data from school systems, from educational systems that might be under-resourced, or it might be difficult to collect educational data from students themselves that aren't as fully involved in the educational system. And so the one thing that we really work closely to accomplish is to make sure that these large data sets very much represent the students of interest. And in this sense, I'm looking at the generalizability within the context of the United States educational system. And so we make sure that our data sets are represented by sex or gender. We make sure that they're representative of race and ethnicity. We make sure that they're representative of first language status or English language learner status. And we really try hard to make sure that all of the data that we develop are represented of socioeconomic status, right? So before, and when we do go about releasing these big data sets, we ensure that all of that information is made available within those open data sets so that anyone who develops new algorithms or new models on these data sets have the opportunities to test those models for bias. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was the algorithmic divide. And this has to do with using diverse or homogeneous teams to develop and validate algorithms. Where we work really hard, and I haven't heard this mentioned before, is that when we're annotating data sets, because we're very much interested in some type of educational outcome. So we oftentimes have human raters go through and annotate data sets for specific outcomes. We need to make sure that those raters, those experts, also represent the demographics and the diversity of the community of which they're representing. And so we do everything in our power to make sure that when we hire raters, that those raters themselves represent the community in terms of sex, race, ethnicity, and also in terms of socioeconomic status. And this is hard to do, but if you don't do this correctly, you end up having, let's say, a corpus of essays that are scored for writing quality that have been scored mostly by white males with college degrees. And they're passing judgment onto these essays that may not represent judgments from the entire community as a whole. So those are kind of the two main things that I focus on, making sure that the data divide representation is not problematic, and making sure that algorithmic divide representation is also not problematic when we develop large databases, and making sure that those databases that we do produce that are open source and freely available in the community contain as much information as possible about the raters, about the students, to ensure that any models that come from these data sets are as unbiased or fair as possible.
Now, if I may, I would like to ask you a question, Scott. You said that you test data for bias. Well, I don't really think this is simple, but anyhow, how do you do that?
I'll give you, I'm on mute, no, I'm good. I'll give you an example. So we have recently produced a data set called the Persuade data set. It's a corpus of 26,000 essays. These essays were produced in a standardized assessment in the United States at the state level. And we made sure that we had as strong as representation as possible for the students that are within this data set. And when we had those essays, we had them scored for overall holistic quality of the essay. We had them annotated for discourse features in the essays. So how many claims the essays have, how much data, evidence, thesis, positions, things like that were annotated. And then we also annotated for the quality of those discourse elements. And we wanted to ensure that the raters that we use for this scoring were also representative of a larger community. We fed this into, we host a lot of competitions on a data analytics website called Kaggle, which is run and owned by Google, I guess Alphabet now. And it's basically an opportunity for data analytics and data specialists to come together to solve problems that hopefully are important to the community and society as a whole. There's usually prizes attached to it, but it gives an opportunity for data analysts to look at new problems to use their kind of quiver or their arsenal of machine learning techniques to solve problems that may be new to them. So within that competition, what we did is we had a side competition, and the side competition said, look, your algorithm was the strongest at predicting accuracy of discourse elements, but was it overly biased? Were you better at predicting discourse elements, let's say in essays that were written by white middle-class students, and were your algorithms worse at predicting discourse elements in essays that were written by lower socioeconomic Hispanic students? And if their accuracies are variable between those two communities, it gives you some evidence that the models that they're developing are favoring one type of demographic or socioeconomic status over another. That
I was just thinking, well, I don't really know if there is a strong connection with what we are talking about. I really feel when looking at all the machine learning literature, which is based on data set, of course, I really feel that I would like to have more papers testing one approach, one architecture or another on several data sets. Everybody's taking one data set, two data set, and look how excellent I am on that data set comparing to others who testing on that data set or on these two data sets. But the power of generalization, if you are ready to look at that power, is to be able to correctly classify or a multitude, a set of the data sets. And now it's true that you raised this very good point that it not only shows you the power of generalization, but also it cannot be biased or not. It may be biased, I don't know, over either sex, color, or whatever, but it also may be biased from the point of view, I don't know, of this certain set of scenes. Yes, it's not only the ethical bias part, which is very important. You may have biases from some other reasons. I don't know, you just take a data set which has a certain kind of whatever, of elephant, just not a data. That was kind of hypothetical example. Okay, then, Oronzo, please.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm Oronzo Parlangeli from the University of Siena, and I think I am a cognitive psychologist. So what I think is obviously more linked to human beings, to human way, to the people, to the way in which people process information and biases, and how they can understand artificial intelligence systems. So I think that artificial intelligence systems should be an opportunity for reflection for what concerns the relation between the system and its user, because probably the two systems, the human beings and the artificial intelligence system, together they give rise to, they produce a new system in which the interaction should be understood in such a way that it can foster the comprehension of the reciprocal intention, the mutual intentions. I mean, probably the intelligence system should be designed in such a way that they can manifest to the user the behavior, the intention in such a way that the user can interact in a new way with these systems, a way in which probably a way that can resemble the cultural collaborative learning processes that have been theorized by Tomasello, for example, in which there is a reflective thinking about the intention of the two or those that are involved in the relationship. So I think that educational system in artificial intelligence should be aimed toward this more broad objective of designing not just the system, the artificial system, but all the system, the relational system. And this is one of the main objectives probably. And the other is also to probably give to the teacher probably would be involved in the educational relationship, the abilities to foster this reflection inside the system, the learner and the artificial system. And this could be a new role for the teacher, the one not just to be in some way helping hand to the artificial system, but as a person that is able to foster reflection of about the relationship of those that are involved in the educational process. In addition, I'm interested in the fact that obviously artificial intelligence systems are mainly produced because in engineering, the designers are some way have the opportunities to produce new things, new technology, and so there is in some way the willing to go forward, but in many situations, this implies that there is no reflection on the direction that this evolution is going to take. And I think that probably one way to think about the use of artificial intelligence is not just to think about the use of the system, but to think about the way in which these systems are taught to new designers, are taught to new engineers. And probably we should start to think that we have to think about how to educate people in producing artificial intelligence system. This also because we all know that there is a gender gap between the designers and that they are essentially white and males, and still today female women are thought to be less proficient in engineering and computer science. So if we could change this kind of perception and introduce and make women, girls more involved in the production, probably this will have some positive consequences on the systems themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Oronzo, very much. Now, just to link into what you said, I think that here in Politehnica University and Department of Computer Science, we are quite happy from this point of view, because we have around 40% women studying in computer science. So I think it's a good rate. And of course, we are really pleased about that. Okay, so Ilkka. Hi, Ilkka.
Yeah, you posed a lot of questions and many broad questions. I would just like to start from the how can AI support learning and assessment. So the first point is, of course, that AI is already supporting learning. It's not artificial intelligence specific applications, but we are using at schools a lot of AI-based tools like search engines and video annotation and all kinds of things. So it is already there. The question that we would have kind of specialized artificial intelligence systems for teaching and learning is more complicated. Specifically, the question about assessment is an interesting one from the ethics point of view, of course, because what we measure is really grounded on our theories that what are the aims of education and what we are trying to achieve. So to talk about ethics of AI in education, we, in my view, should be talking about ethics of education. So it's kind of not that different. And there are many difficult problems in ethics of education that are relevant for artificial intelligence use in educational contexts as well. So for instance, as Kaśka was saying in her keynote, large majority of current AI systems in research are based on mastery learning. This is a very specific understanding of the objectives of education and learning. And of course, education theorists have much broader views than what we are trying to do when we actually have schools, like for instance, for K-12 specifically. The link, for instance, if you think about how mastery learning, the idea that we should give the personalized teaching so that every student can achieve specific levels of competence in specific areas, like in mathematics. It itself already is built on utilitarian idea of ethics. So this is a very specific consequentialist tradition in ethics, philosophy of ethics. And there are others. So there are many different approaches to what we mean by ethics. These become kind of the kind of underlying ethical assumptions that are built into these pedagogic models become more clear when we start to talk more, about the ethics of education and then the ethics of AI in education. And of course, you all know that much of the focus on technology in education has been on kind of enhancing and making more efficient teaching and learning. This obviously is only one part of what educational systems try to do. I'm here referring simply to Gert Biesta, for instance, and pointing out that in his works, he's been saying that, okay, we have roughly 3 different functions of education in society. One is subjectification, one is qualification, and one is socialization. And if you look at the history of education, the different parts of this triangle have been emphasized in different ways. And the history of educational thinking has been shifting from the kind of efficiency point of view, which often views education as a way of producing kind of useful skills for labor market and jobs, to more humanistic views where you emphasize more the kind of human development aspects. The human development aspect itself is closely related to one specific form of educational ethical thinking, which would be competent kind of capability-based approaches to ethics, which actually has not been used very often in the context of AI in education. Anyway, the point is that there are many different traditions of ethics, and in these different framings of education, different kinds of outcomes become important, and the assessment critically depends on how we see the objectives of education. So this is actually deeper ethics question than often has been discussed, but it is obviously not only within AI, it's also within education itself a critical question. Maybe the second point I would like to make is that in all these discussions about artificial intelligence in education, the debate is sometimes a bit confusing, because sometimes we talk about research on AI in education. The kind of professional AI ed people are really doing research. They are really designing these systems. They are studying these systems. On the other hand, in the policy side, there is also very much talk about the kind of commercial applications of this technology. These are very different interests, and the technologies are viewed very differently, depending if you are trying to sell a product to the school, or if you are trying to understand how we learn and how these systems could potentially perform in the future. There is also some confusion, because sometimes people talk about what is really out there, either in laboratory or in commercial systems, or what is really happening at the classroom level. But I think mainly people are talking about imaginary technologies. They think, specifically in the policy, people talk about how personalization is going to revolutionize the education and so forth. This is clearly about a vision of the future which does not exist yet. And we don't really know if that's something we would like to exist or whether it's something that technically could exist. So personalization itself is obviously, again, deeply rooted in the mastery learning type of approach in practice. The third point I might want to make is that what we lack in the ethics discussions is really something that educationalists could bring to these debates and discussions. In ethics, in the theory of ethics, the starting point almost always is an adult, rational person who can make reasonable choices and has developed some kind of moral character. So if you think about Kantian type of ethics or consequentialist ethics, they are based on the idea that a person is able to assess the future outcomes of specific decisions made now. And people are able to make social contracts, they are able to negotiate and found institutional arrangements that lead to fair societies and so forth. The guys in this picture are, let's say, 50-year-old male philosophers sitting around a table in the 19th century. What educationalists are interested is how we develop these capacities for working with this ethical dimension. This kind of developmental approach brings immediately in educational settings very important ethical questions. So for instance, we cannot assume that a child, let's say an 8-year-old child, can do the same, can make the same kinds of ethical judgments as an adult person who is, let's say, regulating the society or writing the laws that are regulating AI. So this kind of developmental approach, in my view, is currently missing, and it is something that is important in educational settings, but it also kind of highlights the lack of attention in ethical theory to developmental issues. So it's kind of an open, huge area, very interesting area. I would say that we can develop new types of ethical theories if we look them through research on education and learning. So one way that AI then can become useful in educational settings and in learning it's not really so different from how we use any technology. So all learning or knowing occurs in some kind of social and technical context, and we use all the existing technologies in that process of making sense of the world and learning new things. So I mean, here I'm thinking like Vygotsky and others who basically say that all kinds of tools are, or later it was kind of said that these are kind of cognitive tools, and we kind of enhance our capabilities to make sense of the world and in learning. So one specific area which I see is a very promising one would be to better understand the regulatory kind of mechanisms that we use in learning, so self-regulation and those things. So technology could make things possible that were not really easy before. So of course, teachers have always personalized teaching and try to make sense, understand how the students are able to regulate their own learning and how to support the development of these capabilities. But AI, and specifically maybe the learning analytics type of AI machine learning approaches, will allow teachers to kind of manage the teaching process in ways that were not possible before. So there I see also opportunity. But this is ethically a challenging thing because like Kaśka was focusing on biases, and a lot of the discussion about ethics of AI in education starts by talking about algorithmic bias and fairness. On the other hand, education is inherently supposed to be unfair. So we have differentiated education. Every teacher tries to treat everyone differently in the classroom. Whereas in most of the ethical traditions in AI, specifically, these are based on human rights and kind of things like that, they are based on a very different question. They are about the question how the society and the government states can treat every citizen equally. And you have to understand that this question comes from the Second World War, where the states really did not treat different societal groups fairly. So the UN human rights, for instance, you can read it as a way of saying that we never want this to happen again. But the question is about relations between the state and the citizen. Whereas at the school, the relation is really about two persons. One is an adult teacher, and the other one normally is an adult teacher, and the other one is a person in the process of becoming something. And the teacher actually helps in this developmental process. So it's a very, very different question than what was aimed at the ethical frameworks in the kind of, let's say, rights-based, human rights-based approaches to ethics, or in medical ethics as well, which are kind of looking for slightly different questions. But I'm just highlighting the point that ethics is not supposed to be unbiased. It's not supposed to be fair in the way of having equal treatment over everyone. The question is much more about equity and how to compensate kind of deficiencies and differences in the educational setting so that each individual person could become what the person's potential is. So this goes back all the way to Aristotelian view on kind of realizing the potential in education. So, but I mean, I'm stopping here, just noting that many of these questions are not trivial at all. A lot of the focus has been on technology, which we are actually not talking about when we talk about ethics of AI in education. On the other hand, the ethics of artificial intelligence in general can really benefit from better understanding of developmental processes, the social functions of education in society, and the changes in these social functions. So where we are in the industrial age, what was the role of education in that setting, and how we are moving towards this so-called knowledge society and global system, multicultural kind of interactions, where the functions of education are also changing. So then my question has been that how these technologies can support societies and ourselves in this transformation from the industrial age toward the kind of next future.
Thank you very much, Ilkka, for your intervention. Yeah, I would invite some other participants if they would like to make some comments or ask questions for the panelists.
I agree perfectly with what has been said by Ilkka just a few minutes ago. And let me just jump in a future a year from now, where possibly artificial intelligence could have replaced teachers, let's say. And let me go for a moment to the root of the word intelligence, that in Latin is a Latin intelligere, that, as you know, means reading in between the lines. But as that in our understanding, in our human understanding, is a little bit more than that, because it requires also elaboration, design, and prediction. So if we switch to the education, this means that, or if we focus on education, this means that in a Socratic perspective, this kind of intelligence should be able to support the student to achieve their goal, not necessarily those defined by the society, but this is another topic. As a function of the continuous changing of the border condition, let's say student action, reaction, context changes, etc. So, if anytime the artificial intelligences will be able to act as in this way, so they will really able to replace the teacher. This means that they should look like as a sentient entities, and for sure they should be capable to produce much more than a reasonable, credible discourse and interaction. So just think to the recent article about Google Lambda chatbot. My question is, do you think that with respect to all this, the Turing test can be considered outdated?
Outdated, I guess, in what sense?
Outdated in the sense that it's not in a teaching environment, it's not any longer, it will be never enough to produce a reasonable and credible discourse. So if we are trying to measure the credibility of the intelligence only on the basis of producing such discourses, probably this will be not enough for the educational environment. So that's why I was asking if can be considered an outdated test.
Yeah, well, while you were asking, it made me think that this question of whether AI can replace a teacher seems, to me at least, to be an odd one. Because why would it be, why is replacement, I guess, what we're striving for? Why wouldn't it be augmentation, which is that a teacher plus AI is stronger than either one alone? And in that sense, I agree with you that Turing would not be enough, or passing the Turing, in so much that it should be something else that proves that one plus the other is greater than any individual component.
Yeah, and if I could, I'd like to add two things to that. So I do a lot of work with technologists that are very much interested in chatbots and integrating chatbots into educational technologies, specifically focusing on math. And at this point, you know, you have your GPT-3s and your large language models, and they can hold conversations, but they can't hold directed conversations. And so most of the chatbots that you're going to find within educational technologies still focus on old rule-based decision trees about how to provide feedback to learner. And at this point, the only thing that people are trying to work with, you know, these kind of anonymous chatbots, is to provide more emotional feedback or emotional support instead of providing specific feedback on, you know, whether your algebraic equation is correct or incorrect, because for that, we still need rules-based models. I think this goes back to the idea that the Turing model probably is outdated because you can put a human in a room and some of these newer GPT-3 models in another room, and they'll fool the humans for long enough. But if you start to say, hey, I want you to be able to teach me world history, and I want to be able to engage you in a specific conversation about, you know, Roman legions, they're probably going to fail that type of Turing test. And that's the type of Turing test I think that's probably more important for education, is like this domain-specific or task-specific Turing test. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that we talk about whether AI will replace teachers or not. I think that's an interesting question, but I also think a more interesting question is, will AI make some types of teaching redundant? And so, for instance, I started off my career as a language teacher, teaching English in China, teaching English in the Czech Republic. And as not autonomous kind of voice to text and clear, direct conversation becomes more and more possible using like even Google Translate, as that technology develops, the need for language teachers is going to be circumvented because most people aren't going to need to study a language to speak to somebody else that does not speak their first language, because it can be augmented by the technology. And most people don't learn a language because they love a language. Most people learn a language because it serves some type of organizational or principle that is related to industry. And so there's not a strong desire to learn that language. And so as people start to realize that we could have, you know, these metaphorical Babel fishes that actually work very industriously and are principled and robust, I would assume that that's going to have an immediate effect on the number of language teachers that need to be employed, because there's no longer really a need to teach a language when you can have a computer augmented system that allows you to speak a different language to somebody else. And so I think sometimes it's not so much as the idea of like the AI is going to replace teachers. It's more of a case where AI is going to make certain types of teaching redundant.
So if I may come in here, I don't know whether anybody else wants to. As somebody who comes from AI engineering perspective, I think that the Turing test remains actually relevant, but it remains relevant depending on what perspective you take within the field itself. So we have to remember there are a lot of people within the AI field focus very much on understanding the kind of fundamental human behaviors as providing the inspiration for how we can encode those behaviors in the AI systems. So at this level, the Turing test still, you know, provokes, at the very least, provokes thoughts about, you know, what is thinking, what is intelligence, what is meaning making. Of course, if we take the Turing test in the broader context of all of the counter arguments as well, and all of the different improvements on the Turing test that have been proposed over the decades. Now, I think from the point of view of education, you know, we do have to ask ourselves the question of, again, you know, what is it that we want these technologies to, what role we want these technologies to have? I really do find it really difficult to, I find the questions like, will the AI replace teachers quite hard to engage with in the first place, because my counter question always will be, you know, why should we even consider this? Who is actually, you know, who is the decision maker, or who is the force behind suggesting that this is a good idea in the first place? And actually, a lot of the work within the field, you know, the field is actually the field of AI ed itself, and there are many cognate areas that fields that enrich it, and vice versa, is around 50 years old, and you know, it has been quite a long journey from these kinds of drill and practice forms of technologies that people were developing. And there's a lot of this still going on. And there is, as I said in my talk, you know, there's still an overemphasis on particular forms of pedagogies and pedagogical supports and particular kinds of assessments. But the field has evolved quite a lot. So actually, if you drill down into the diversity of the different approaches that people are trialing, you know, we have come a long way. And one of the key take-home messages for now, at least, is that we really shouldn't be talking about replacement. We should be thinking about enhancement and I struggle with words here because I don't like the word innovation. It has really terrible connotations. But if we mean by innovation, actually changing things for the better, improving them, then this is really where we should be putting our efforts in understanding, in interrogating the role, and not just the role, but also how we enable the AI the systems that we develop to enact that role in education. So enhancement, augmentation are very much the kinds of areas of focus within the field, which is actually leading to some really interesting approaches. It has to be said that a lot of these approaches are very difficult to to evaluate and to use in the real world. So this is one of the key barriers for the field. The things that sell the best, and actually this is also what is being proliferated by the kind of the push also by the certainly in the UK, there's a push by the policymakers to incentivize businesses to get engaged with the educational technology, and AI obviously plays a huge part. And this kind of reinforces these the model or one particular model of education where there is this focus, as Ilkka was talking about, on efficiency, for example, this kind of very utilitarian perspective that is being fed by the kinds of technologies that we actually do see on the ground. But within the field itself, there is a very big and strong emphasis with examples of really quite interesting and out of the box kind of thinking approaches and experiments, if you like, of how we can do things differently, how we can actually question the system with the help of the technologies that we design, rather than going with the grain and reinforcing things that may not be that great. So that's my response. But the Turing test, in my opinion, is still relevant and will be. But again, it depends on your whether you treat the field as a as a way of posing these really fundamental questions and trying to address them through the development and of technology that models human behaviors.
Maybe I could come in because I have a slightly different take on the question. Turing test, in my view, is not trying to ask a question that would be relevant for educationalists. If you think where it came from, it's really kind of a statement of logical empirism in the 1940s, where the idea was that unless you can kind of positively observe a phenomena, it doesn't really make sense to talk about it too much. So Turing himself was asking this question, and specifically in the context of whether you can make a difference between a woman and a man, and whether the capability of making this difference would be influenced if the woman would be replaced by a machine. So the point is that from a kind of a positivistic point of view, this is as much as you can say about the differences in intelligence in machines and humans. From education point of view, this question is not really what we are talking about, in my view, because if you think what a teacher is doing, the teacher is trying to make sense of a child, if we talk about, let's say, K-12, and the capacities of this child to learn new things. So there is a lot of processing happening that deals with intentions, kind of creating models of the intentions of the child and the capability of moving in this kind of, if we talk about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, scaffolding the child in a way that leads to specific educational objectives and goals. So these kinds of things like intention and scaffolding are not to be found in Turing's discussion. He doesn't say anything about those kinds of things. That okay, he just asked the question that can you make the distinction between this kind of intelligence and that kind of intelligence? I mean, talking about, basically he's not talking about intelligence, he's talking about capability of making distinctions between two situations. So he does not have a theory of intelligence in any sense. Whereas in education, you really think about knowledge development and other types of development of human persons. So you are building a model. So the difference is in a way between simulation and the reality. So like having a map and really walking in the real landscape. There are two different things. And in my view, Turing never tried to go to the real landscape. He's just saying that as long as we just talk about the pictures, if it's a kind of flat picture of the world, whether it's a different thing if you draw it or if you take a photograph of it. So in that sense, I would say that you have to understand Turing in the context of the philosophical thinking in the 1940s, early 50s. This was really positivistic thing. Since then, cognitive sciences, even cognitive sciences, but AI, cognitive sciences, and certainly learning theories and education theories have moved far, far beyond that kind of starting point. So in that sense, Turing is not necessarily, I mean, it's kind of irrelevant in a way. Although it can be interesting, like for chatbox, because if you want to simulate some kind of a discussion, it's kind of it's a relevant question maybe there. But education is not about repeating or replicating meaningful looking discussions. It's actually making sense and making meaning, and it's making new kinds of meaning. So the term innovation really is there. It's creating knowledge, and knowledge creation. It's a different story.
I agree with Ilkka that the Turing test has nothing to do with the intelligence, because you know, in the last 40 years have been developed a lot of systems that are not intelligent at all, and they can pass the Turing test. I can remember Eliza, first psychiatrist, which was able to stimulate the patient to speak about the problem, but there was no intelligence in that system, that it just had a set of predefined sentences that were displayed on the screen, and then the patient just typed the response to these sentences. And they thought they were interacting with the real psychiatrist, though it was just a set of sentences. And this probably reminds to the problem that is, what is the test bed for an artificial system that is used for education? What we should think about the necessary characteristics or the objective that this system should in some way reach in order to be effective, to be appreciated, to be used and to be pleased by the person who is interacting with it, a child or an old person. What is it? And so probably the Turing test may be interesting as a metaphor, just to think about what we need in order to reach some objective.
And still listening to this last comment of Ilkka, I was placing myself in the human communication area. Yes, education takes us there to the relationship between humans and interaction between humans. And one of the things that we are constantly remembered is, by definition, human relationship is completely unpredictable. That's why in education, I also believe Ilkka just shared with us, it's a relationship, that's a context of relationship where you really want to build on a real path. The relation of the teacher with the student, that's something that's done in real time. It's unpredictable. To consider it would be possible to have some kind of model or some kind of system that would cope with unpredictability at this level. At the moment, I'm not seeing how this can be done. You'd have to have a model capable of in real time adapting to this. Now we have a one-to-one relation when we're speaking of education, as any human communication scenario. How is this possible? I don't know. So really, I was listening to Ilkka's last comment, and it took me into human communication, into human interaction, and to its completely unpredictable. Of course, there are scenarios that are very specific scenarios, but I don't think that's what we are speaking of when we are taking this into the education area, which is extremely rich, extremely challenging for human interaction and for this situation. Okay, thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you very much to you all.
Please go.
May I add something that came out from the question from Carlo? I was thinking and hearing also Oronzo answer. One of the questions that arose was, what will be the test in a learning context applying AI? What would be our question? And instead of checking whether something is real or fictional or a machine or a human, I think that one of the questions that came up is the believability of knowledge. Because when we build a system, it learns with the knowledge of the community. That is a pattern, and it can be both good or bad. What is the most repeated pattern in society? And checking whether this question that came, who teaches who, if it is the teacher, if it is the learner, if it is an AI system, and what is the believability of the knowledge source and the knowledge model. I think that is some of the considerations that we have to think in a near future. I don't know if
just wanted to make a comment. Thanks for the very interesting discussion so far from all the AI experts. I basically see AI from the perspective of teaching AI, not to build systems, but teaching teachers, because how to transfer this kind of knowledge to pupils, to the future citizens, to use AI systems. Because we are working here in the School of Education in the University of Strathclyde, and we train teachers, primary teachers and secondary teachers. And I would just like to share with you my experience during the last semester that we have introduced a couple of hours in a module about science education in the primary school. I think there is a need to educate teachers how to inform about the promises and the implications of AI. So in order to equip these teachers when they go to their classrooms later to teach appropriately their pupils. For example, in our program, we try to provide some kind of knowledge on how to understand the various types of AI, such as machine learning, or the importance of having data to train computers, for example, let's say to classify things, to make decisions and all this, and also to give recommendations. And the outcome is very positive so far. Teachers perceived very positive this kind of training, so to speak. And this is all that I would like to share, that there is a need, that we need to emphasize this teacher training. And the good thing is that there are many resources, open educational resources about AI available. So it's not difficult for us to provide this kind of training to teachers. That's all. Thank you for the parenthesis.
I was going to add very briefly, based on what you just said and what Liana said, is that one thing that's going to be important is developing trust between technologies and teachers, so that teachers do trust AI in the classroom and are willing to trust their students' education with the AI. And that's an important step that's going to involve these AI systems giving strong feedback, correct interventions, and being able to model kind of students' theory of mind accurately. And that might be kind of an important Turing test in itself, if humans can come to trust these systems enough to allow their students to use them kind of unassisted.
That's true. It's a two-step process. First, teachers need to trust the systems, and then pupils and students need to trust the systems as well.
I just want to emphasize that Scott's comment is absolutely great. This barrier is unsurmountable in some situations. For example, we discussed with Romanian high school teachers speaking literature and Romanian language, and they could not believe that grammatical error correction can be performed better by a computer. Whereas indeed, yeah, in English, Grammarly provides excellent recommendations for grammatical errors, and such research would actually help immensely improve writing in Romanian, but they were completely reluctant in using any automation system. And still, all essays and everything are handwritten, so there's no automation tool for that.
This is more a question because I just don't know the answer, so I'm curious. for the trust there, has it been evaluated? And does it, I guess, is that trust of educators of AI? Is it similar to other areas of trust in AI where transparency and explainability increases trust if possible, or has that been looked at?
So there is, can I come in? Sorry, I was looking for functionality to raise my hand, but I can't find it. My trouble with technology continues. There is quite a lot of work. Well, a lot maybe is an overstatement, but there are shifts towards looking at trust in education. Actually, the question of trust are very, very complex, and they demand well, they demand a good set of definitions of different forms of trusts in different contexts for, you know, and with different populations, but they also demand a very careful unpacking of the different elements of the technology, because we have the underlying AI technology, but actually let's not forget that we also have the interfaces that mediate between the underlying layers and the humans, and these will have, and we know that from experiments in psychological experiments, these will have, and also a lot of HCI work, they will have impact on the perception of how these technologies are being perceived. And there is also we need to be very careful in distinguishing between technologies that are trustworthy and the way that we actually define what that means, and technologies that the users believe can be trusted. And the two can be quite different, and they can be very different in different contexts. They can be very different depending on the expertise of the users. For example, in the context of teacher practitioners, this may be dependent on the level of experience of individual teachers, not just with the use of technology, with respect to the use of technology, but within actual educational practices and their own and their teaching experiences. So these are very complicated issues which are being very slowly but surely unpacked, and they also relate very fundamentally to human psychological predispositions. And some of these predispositions are to do with our tendency to automate anything that we can automate. I'm talking here at the, about the kind of neurocognitive levels, and maybe Oronzo can come in on this because he's actually the specialist, not me. But these are questions that we do need to address as well with respect to, how these technologies are actually shaping our perceptions of the environment, but also of the way that how they habituate us to in the way that we interact with these technologies and in what we expect from those technologies. So I just wanted to come in and to say that, this is it's really just to illustrate and reinforce the point that this is actually not a trivial thing to unpack. There is a lot of complexity involved, some of which may be to do with the educational practice, but a lot of it is to do with broader questions around, how we interact with the environment and AI as part of that environment. And the other point that I wanted to make is that the conversation, which I find really, really interesting, and I'm really fascinated to hear all of the different points of view, kind of bags education into one big bag. And when I think about this, and when I think also about the different examples of work, of my various colleagues within the AI ed field, but also my own work, the context, the educational context, and the applications that we develop can be very, very different depending on what we actually, how we define education, what we consider as belonging even to education. So a lot of conversation that is happening here revolves again around the kind of standard model of teaching. A lot of it is about classroom teaching. A lot of it is about mainstream teaching. And I was kind of sitting here and going back and forth, between the question around the Turing test and so on, trying to kind of contextualize this in what has been said. And one of the examples from my own work, which I spent the best part of 2 decades on, was in the context of neurodiversity and using AI to enhance practices, classroom practices, in the context of supporting mainly children on the autism spectrum to learn, rehearse, gain opportunities for rehearsal of social interaction skills. And the use of AI there actually proved, on a small scale, but it was quite really revealing and promising with respect to what we're discussing here. It proved almost like a catalyst for the teachers who could observe the children interacting with AI. Well, using the term here that has been used, chatbots. They are, in the case of the research that I'm talking about, they were virtual characters and underpinned with quite substantial what we call cognitive architectures that drove the behavior of these agents. And so the teachers could observe the interactions between teachers, between students, between children and these characters. And the interactions themselves actually allowed to provided a lot of the children, a lot of whom were nonverbal, with with a stepping stone, with a kind of a buffer between the you know, their world and their states and the real world classrooms, which they often find very stressful. They often don't manifest the kind of behaviors that they actually can manifest because of the stressful circumstances. And so I'm talking about this because there are actually, you know, I think it's really important to contextualize what aspects of educational practice we are trying to support, and with what kinds of technologies. And I think it's really important. I mean, I do get excited about you know, considering different ways of doing things from the ones that are currently available to us, and that are actually, you know, ingrained in current practices. And the example that I have just talked about was, it provides an illustration of how we can add value to what is already existent in the practices, that can open new avenues for people to think differently, for teachers to think differently, for parents to think differently, and for learners themselves to think differently about what learning can look like and how it can be supported. And actually, in this case, the case of this example, Turing test is absolutely incredibly important, because you do want to make these characters believable.
I would like to add something about the ways in which an artificial system can shape the perception of other things that are not really strictly related to the same system. And in this regard, I think that a good example is a recent research that has been published in 2021 that was conducted by Katie Winkle and her colleagues. And if I remember correctly, they evaluated the gender stereotypes of teenage boys and girls about other boys and girls. And they found that boys in particular, this is an obvious result, have prejudice about girls' ability to study computer science. And in their experiment, they had different groups of boys and girls, but they all saw videos in which there was a robot, a female robot, which could respond in the interaction, the video interaction, in three different ways. The female robot could be as a Siri or Alexa, quite neutral, even polite and fair. Even when you ask to this system, to this voice assistant, something about maybe sexual activities, they always respond in some polite ways. In another condition, the female robot answered in a more argumentative way. So try to interact with the user, explaining their answer, asking for some questions. And in another condition, the female robot was responding aggressively. So they tested the perception, the gender stereotype about the female, the ability of of girls in studying computer science before the experiment and after the experiment. And very interestingly, they found that the female changed their opinion after having saw the aggressive female robot. They thought that the girls should be encouraged to study computer science after they had seen a female robot responding in an aggressive way. But also the boys changed their attitude towards girls studying computer science, in that they, after they have been seeing the video with the female robot that was responding in an argumentative way, they after the experiment, they thought that the girls could be clever, more clever than before in studying computer science. So they had changed their attitude towards girls studying computer science. It's just to say that the interaction actually, as Kaśka said, can change. It can change our opinion, can change our perception, not only of the system, but also of things that are related to the use of the system, to the design of the system, but that are not the system.
Yes, I think that all the points that were raised here were extremely interesting and challenging. In fact, we are just looking and trying to explain three concepts that resist definition. First is intelligence. Then second is education. And you point, many of you point the fact that it's very difficult to define education. And third, as you said also, what is ethics? So, wow, we are very strong that looking at these three aspects together, we just stated some excellent points and ideas. So I would invite the panelists to have each one a closing word for our panel. So I would propose to start in an inverse order and start with Ilkka. Please, Ilkka.
Well, my closing word is simply that this has been an interesting discussion. I've learned many new things, and my own impression is that we still don't really understand many of these things that are important. We started with talking about ethics, ethical challenges and opportunities, and at least in my view, the discussion has started in the area of education, what these ethical challenges could mean. A lot of the discussion has been about things that are kind of obvious, look obvious, like privacy and fairness and autonomy and bias and so forth. But as Kaśka was saying, even the concept like trustworthiness, there's a lot of research what it means and how we should understand it. And if you read any of the kind of, let's say, ethical guidelines that are out there, they use these terms like fairness, justice, benefits or beneficence, trustworthiness. I mean, these concepts are really complex, and I haven't seen very much kind of conceptual discussion on those. What I have seen in the last years is much more technical discussion where people take concepts like fairness as a starting point, and then they try to kind of solve the problem of fairness. But obviously, from a kind of social, political developmental point of views, these are very difficult questions. So I hope that this discussion will continue, and it takes some time to actually understand what we are talking about here. The reservation there is that until we understand these things better, we should be quite careful in making claims and in implementing these technologies in real settings. So there's a lot of space for research, a lot of critical thinking needed for over a kind of exaggerated claims about the potential and the problems also that we need to really keep on discussing. So that would be maybe my final comment here.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ilkka that probably what we still need is a way to stay together with designers in order to work together and reflecting about what is going to be developed. Because I can think that there is a sort of divide between producer, implementer, designers, and those people like me who is thinking about the direction that the development of new technologies is taken. And so, to tell the truth, I think that we, at least me, I am always a step forward about what is developed. And I think that probably I should be able to inform in a more effective way those who are developing artificial intelligence systems. And I don't know why this happens. Probably because there is, at least in Italy, still a very notable division between disciplines. And I stay here in a department of communication, and engineers are staying in another floor of this building, and we do not speak together. And they are going to their way without thinking to me, and I just look to what they develop after they have developed their systems. And so I think that this is not just the way in which the things could develop, and I think that we could both benefit some improvement in our activities if we could speak together.
I was going to stick to this theme. I was going to thank the SLERD program committee for putting together this panel. It's great to see educationalists, theorists, philosophers, cognitive scientists, AI experts, technologists come together to discuss these issues. The one thing that I would like to add is that we can't forget who their shareholders are when we're developing and testing this technology, is to keep in mind that the end users, which are going to be students and teachers, and how they interact with these technologies.
Erika?
Yeah, just two, I guess, closing quick points. One, just towards the question or conversation surrounding bias and ethics and fairness. You know, I think too often, and I'm guilty of this as well, is that we talk about, because I like quantitative tests, that you know, how can we test algorithms and run different metrics? But just as equally, we should be concerned about building institutional and organizational structures that allow for this sort of accountability at all levels for fairness ethics. To include the development and implementation of auditing procedures, just like we do for financial, usually for financial sort of systems and organizations, such that, for example, a CEO is just as accountable for fairness as he or she would be for financial responsibility. And then my second point is, I guess I'm most excited in this conversation, and it was mentioned earlier, but I'll echo it again, in doing more than mimicry of teaching by algorithms, and really looking towards, you know, innovation in this space. So how can algorithms be used to disrupt teaching styles or methods? And for example, I have colleagues who work in artificial creativity as a way of overcoming or pushing people to overcome cognitive biases. And I think if we could start testing or experimenting in those kinds of spaces, you know, that's probably the biggest potential of really seeing a disruptive sort of improvement in education.
So now I come at a disadvantage because everybody said all the very brilliant points already, with which I very much agree. I would like to second Scott's point about the involvement of the well, that we must not forget the shareholders. I would probably emphasize it and extend it a little bit further by saying that actually teachers, educational practitioners, learners, whoever they may be, you know, and however we define education as, you know, as K-12 or as lifelong learning kind of experience, are notoriously missing from the so-called room, where the decisions about what technologies are being designed, why, how they're being deployed, and so on are missing. You know, the efforts of involving you know, the so-called beneficiaries of the shareholders is, you know, this is a really difficult again, notoriously, notorious difficulty within the research. And so I think what I would say is that we really should advocate for, not only inclusion of the missing shareholders from the decision making and from the design of these technologies. We should try to enable a certain level of emancipation where we can actually open ourselves to learning from the people at the front line of education. And the final point, the second point that I wanted to make is that there is a lot of effort, and I did talk about some of this during my talk as well, that focuses on finding solutions at the technical level and addressing ethics questions at the kind of at the governance of the system level. What is missing still is what I would call the kind of a third order assessment of the ethical value, which relates to the broader and wider concerns at the social, psychological, economic, and even environmental impacts of the systems, and all of these things are mutually influencing. And I think that looking at them from the perspective of education and trying to actually also influence the broader discussions of AI from within education, which is fundamental to society and human well-being and prosperity and democracy and so on, is something that we shouldn't shy away from. And I really would, well, basically that's what I'm trying to advocate for.
Okay, thank you very much, Kaśka. I would like to thank all the panelists. I would like to thank Carlos and Mihai and all the organizers of the outstanding event, and of course all the participants who, in fact, all together we created this, I would say, very successful debate. Thank you very much.